Welcome to MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 24. I want to begin with a few words about Gimmel Tammuz, coming from Gimmel Tammuz, thanking you for your very warm and encouraging words. It's been as a true Zman Chassidus, pretty much unprecedented in history, but especially for us Chassidim, to see such an awakening and Chassidus of so many people. Sadly, we had to rely on 20 years of Gimmel Tammuz. And the question that many people are asking, and just to quote one of the questioners, is what do we do now? It was beautiful to see, it was inspiring to see people from all walks of life, different directions and different angles, responding to the Rebbe, though it's 20 years since we've seen the Rebbe physically. But what do we do now? And of course, that's the greatest challenge. It's a challenge that Chassidim expressed to the Alter Rebbe, and Chassidim through all the generations expressed, and it goes all the way back to Moshe Rabbeinu. How do you hold on to inspiration after the moment dissipates? And the answer is that you have to find some action that you begin to do on an ongoing basis and continue to do. Be'ifin shel kviyus. I mentioned in the previous episodes, find something that you share the Rebbe, you share Chassidus, you share Torah with others in an ongoing basis, a commitment. And the commitment continues to channel that inspiration. I'm not saying anything that is not obvious, which frankly I think most of the discussions here are many things common sense, things taken from the different sichos, mamorim, letters of the Rabbeim. But sometimes it has to be spelled out, even though it may be obvious. That the key thing here is to become the soldier of the Rebbe that is an ongoing soldier. As the Frierdiker Rebbe says, a soldat, a soldier, even when he's asleep, he's a soldier. Which means we're on duty and we have a mission, and the mission is now more compelling than ever. So it's not that 20 years of Gimmel Tammuz, it's over with, hangover. What do we do now? Is we must continue and maintain it and actually grow in this connection. And that usually is done best, as it says in Hacholzu, when two people make a resolution together, it's far more likely it'll last, and it grounds it. As the Rebbe very often, at the end of Fabrengens, when he would give mashke or mezenis for different events, he would say, based on the Drashas Haran, why the Nevi'im, when they prophesied, they would hold on to something with Gashmizdik in order to be mamshich, the spiritual revelation, into some type of physical form, which would give it the power to perpetuate itself. There have been many questions and comments and follow-up to some of the discussions we had in the previous weeks, which I will hopefully address as well in this episode. But being that there are also many other questions, I would like to go to a few other topics, and then hopefully go back to some feedback and responses to the questions about the Rebbe and about the Der Hashvi, seventh generation, and other questions and comments that came in. So let me begin with Chabad-lite, this new cliche. Let me phrase it in the questions that have been sent to us. I love learning Chabad Chassidus, Rabbi Jacobson, and consider myself Lubavitch. However, I trim my beard and don't look like others on the street in Crown Heights. I've been told I'm Chabad-lite. What does that mean? Is that a legitimate label? How far off, another questioner writes, how far off is Chabad-lite? Is it okay to call yourself and consider yourself part of Chabad and yet compromise on issues such as tznius or even a beard? This episode will... this was a description. I apologize for reading that, because it's a description of how we're going to discuss this in this episode. But the question is, what does this mean, this Chabad-lite classification? Does it have any meaning, any significance? Did anyone even give us the right to classify anyone? How should we look at those who don't fit the mold? So this is just a reflection of a number of questions, and because I avoid mentioning any particular organizations or synagogues or entities, to keep it general, without trying to stereotype anyone, let me address this topic. I have very mixed feelings in what I'm going to say right now for the following reason. On one hand, the Rabbeim, Chassidus, Torah, v'haftarecha kamecha, is the foundation of all of Yiddishkeit, the foundation of Chassidus. Loving another unconditionally. And it doesn't exclude the people that are close to you either. It's not just the most distant people on earth. Even a stranger as the Baal Shem Tov says. Sometimes it's harder to love those that are closest to you because you're more critical. You don't give them the same type of leeway. Someone that's a Tinnik Shanishba will say, they don't know better. But when someone that's on your own block, someone in your own community, went to your same school, we tend to often become more judgmental. And we know judgmentalism is not an appropriate thing altogether. At the same time, you have Hechiach Techiach Hasam Yisecha. Out of love and responsibility, we should also be expecting and in some ways inspiring and motivating people around us to live up to higher standards. So on one hand, to talk about anybody, whatever it is, for whatever reason, they may be behaving in a way that's outside of so-called the mold, which itself is a discussion. What does mold mean anyway? I'll get to that shortly. We love everybody unconditionally. At the same time, we expect from them the most, especially if they were exposed to the Rebbe, to Chassidus, to Yeshiva, and so on. So that poses a somewhat of a paradox, because what do you do when you have a situation where a person is living a certain way, may not be the highest standards? What do you say? Because on one hand, look at yourself. We all look in the mirror, that we're also not living up to the highest standards. At the same time, so what? So that's why two wrongs make a right? Obviously not. So it's hard to talk about this topic, because if you talk about it really in a personal way, in a caring way, it all has to come down to, is it what you're discussing, is it just to be judgmental, or is it going to have some benefit? Yet, I don't like to retreat from any question, including this Chabad-lite, quote-unquote, question. That's why I'm addressing it. On the other hand, I don't know how many hands I've already said, but on the other hand, there's another issue here. The most important of all, I believe. There's V'hu ha'ikar. Who defines Chabad? The answer is very obvious. The Alter Rebbe was the Miyased of Chassidus Chabad. Only he can define what Chabad is. So for someone to come and create a new label, whether it's Chabad-lite or Chabad-heavy, we have Spitz Chabad. The Rebbe used that a number of times. Chassidim would use it. Spitz Chabad, meaning people who are like on the precipice, the peak of Chabad, or see themselves as such. It was always used actually not in a positive way. That Spitz Chabad are so Chabad that they don't go on taluchas and they don't do other things that the Rebbe expected, because they're like above it all, and so on. But the expression Chabad-lite, Chabad-heavy, yes, I understand it belongs on Diet Coke, and there's Pepsi-lite, and Diet and Light this and Light that. It's a common expression today, but it has no place in the world of Chassidus, because the Rebbe and the Alter Rebbe never says such a thing. He didn't classify Chabadniks that there's heavy Chabadniks, there's middle Chabadniks, and light Chabadniks. Chabad has standards. The Alter Rebbe set them down in Tanya and in the Maimorim of Chassidus, in the Hanhoga of Chassidim, the Mittler Rebbe and others who were Mashpiyim. And there were standards. Did everyone live up to the standards? Obviously, that's the challenge, to live up to them. But to create classifications like this, only the Miyased himself would be a nerve for somebody coming and suddenly describing a new type of Chabad. We do know that the Alter Rebbe, a famous story, where the Alter Rebbe took out the word emes lamite in Tanya, because that would have precluded so many people joining. And by writing emes, instead of emes lamite, that led more thousands of others to join. But that's the Alter Rebbe's decision of how exactly to create the standard, and what's a higher standard, and what's a lower standard. So the whole idea, frankly, coming from a world of Chassidus, coming from a world of doctrine, only the Torah itself, in this case, Torah Chassidus itself, and the Rabbeim can dictate or define such a thing. So let's just say it's unequivocally unacceptable, these terms altogether. I understand why people gravitate towards terms and towards labels, because we like to label people. So I want to make it very clear, there's no such thing as Chabad-lite, period. It's not legitimate. And besides the fact that it itself is somewhat demeaning and condescending, as if like someone is only the light version. And even for people who want to designate themselves that way, you don't speak Lashon Hara on yourself either. Every person who's exposed to the Rebbe, exposed to the Rabbeim, exposed to Chassidus, and for that matter, even those not exposed, everyone in this generation has been classified by the Rabbeim as a Chassid, potential Chassid. And the standard of what Chabad Chassid is, the Rabbeim set, not we set. The fact that a person has a Yetzer Hara, or has other temptations, or has other reasons that they decide to cut corners, or to do things that are compromising to the standard, that's a personal matter that you have to address with yourself, between you and yourself, between you and your mashpiyah, between you and the Rebbe. But I would not give any classification and categories that I'm, Chabad, not Chabad mainstream, I'm Chabad-lite. I think it is disrespectful to the standard that the Rabbeim set, We could say, as I've mentioned a number of times, that Rebbe said by Fabrengen, that everybody has flaws, but don't make a philosophy out of them. A new name, a new label. It would be like Judaism light. There's some people that keep Shabbos the way halacha, and then there's so-called Chachmona Litzlan, Shabbos light. These things don't apply when you're talking to a doctrine, especially a divine doctrine. Even Lahavdil, we wouldn't say something like that. American citizens, there's no such thing as an American citizen light. Citizenship requires certain laws that you abide by, and if you don't, they'll deport you. You won't get a green card, or whatever the conditions of house citizenship. And that's a man-made system altogether. And there's respect. There's no such thing, saying, listen, I'm American citizen for version 2, or the light version of it. So the fact that we don't live up to it, none of us live up to it entirely, let's be honest. But no one gave us the right, and nor should we go ahead and start creating classifications of, whether you're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's expectations. You have challenges. We all have challenges. Don't get depressed by them. Figure out a way to live up to the standards. It's a gift. Which also brings me to another point when you talk about Chabad and Chabad, Chassidus and so on. It's a sad fact that for some people they see Chabad as a franchise or a type of corporation or a brand. I understand in Elam Haza, in this world, people identify with brands. But by no means, God forbid, to say that a Torah movement, a Tenuah in Torah, a Tenuah Chassidus Chabad, is a brand. It's not the Alter Rebbe wanted. He said clearly he doesn't want a maflega. He doesn't want a party. He doesn't want a brand. He's providing us with Torah and left Talmidim. What did Moshe Rabbeinu give us? He didn't give us a brand. Moshe Rabbeinu gave us Torah, Moshe Kibul Torah Messina, Torah from Hashem, and left Talmidim, students. That's exactly what all the Rabbeim did. Hashkof is Chabad, Torah is Chabad, Minhoge Chabad, Nigune Chabad, Hanhoges Chassidus, Darkei Chassidus. These are languages that the Rabbeim use. To start creating some new version of what Chabad defines is absolutely unacceptable. And I'm not speaking now mitzad Hiskashrus alone, and mitzad Bittul, and mitzad Frumkeit. I'm talking about simple Menschlichkeit. The ones that founded the movement are the ones that tell you what the standards are, not the other way around. We don't have a right to go ahead and start saying, hey, we've got ourselves a new type of Chabad manifestation. Chabad is a chelik of Torah that was given in Har Sinai. Torah is Dvar Hashem, a way to live our lives. Chassidus is a gift, a Te'emer Chaim Zochu, a taste of Primius HaTorah, that was also given at Matan Torah, and will be fully revealed, L'Osed Lavi. This Primius HaTorah gives us direction on how to live our lives. Our personal lives, our psychological lives, our emotional lives, our family lives, our business lives. Every sector and every segment of our lives, Torah L'Shon Hera. And Primius HaTorah gives it a dynamic, passionate approach, makes it relevant, makes it spiritual, turns it into something that we can, with vitality, not just mitzvahs anoshim u'lemoda. This is Chassidus. Do we live up to it? That's, each of us have to make that decision. How much we're living up to and what are we doing about it. But to suddenly just fit people into a category, which in many ways, besides being demeaning also, is a way of being lazy. Because now, okay, I fit in this category. What do you expect from me? I'm only the Chabad, I'm only the light version of it. No, there's no such thing. Obviously, you don't judge somebody until you're in his shoes. So moving, every person has their challenges. And some people, you see from the Rebbe and from the Rabbeim, they demanded more because they saw the person was capable of more. That's true, case by case. Some people may have greater challenges and maybe cannot be expected the same thing from them. That doesn't turn them into light. That's their Aveda. And if they do what they have to do, to the fullest, they can accomplish more than someone else who has greater possibilities, who's not doing what he has to do completely. There was a Chassid of the Alter Rebbe who had a great mind. Alter Rebbe would demand of him he should learn more and become a lamnus. He said to the Alter Rebbe, Ich ken de Chalom of sein Alam. Potentially, I'm always could be a scholar because he had that type of mind. And the Alter Rebbe famously responded, just like a ganef, a thief, is not someone who can gamvenen, someone who could steal, but someone who steals, the same thing, a lamdan is nicht devas can lernen, but devas lernt. A lamdan is not someone who could study and be a scholar, but someone who is and actually does it. So someone who's living up to their potential, even if their potential may be a lower one than someone else, another person says, I could do it, many ways, bottom line, it's your effort. Like Zusha was crying in the corner, not why he's not going to be like this one, like that one, like this chassid, like that chassid. He's crying, he'll be like Zusha. They're going to ask him, did you live up to what Zusha was supposed to do? Chassidus speaks about, V'ahavtas Hashem elkacha b'chol vavcha b'chol nafshecha b'chol moedecha. What's moedecha? B'chol vavcha, with your heart, nafshecha, with your spirit. The different interpretations. Moedecha with all your might. With all of you, with all your much. Moed means much. Moed, a lot. With all your a lot. So what does that mean? Moedcha. So Chassidus says, everybody has what is called their much. Meaning, you have what you do average, and then you can go beyond their average. So if you measure two people, some people's average is far higher than some people's beyond average. But and when you go beyond what you're capable of doing today, it becomes a keli for ma'id ha'amiti, which means the real muchness, the real expansion, divine expansion, which is very interesting. A little child of 5 years old goes a little out of their nature. Like he says in Tanya, chapter 15. He goes a little more beyond his nature, which is for a child beyond his nature. But for someone twice his age, it's meaningless. He becomes a keli, that becomes a container to receive merchava atzmi, me'ed ha'amiti. They're not just a relative me'ed, and which seems very strange. How could you say that? One person, let's say, can give tzedakah $100. It's easy for them. They give $105, $200. They went beyond themselves. Another person can give $1 million, and he goes and gives 10 million. How could you compare the two? But for each person, because we don't measure it by comparing people, for each person you have to do what is relative to what is difficult for you to do. For that person, giving that 100 and for that 200 may have been more painful, more difficult than for someone to give 10 million. That doesn't take away from what you can do with $10 million. It doesn't take away from the gift and the value of it. But the point is that each of us have our unique and personal relationship with God, with Hashem. And we have to look at living up to what we are capable of doing. And we don't say, because you're just a child, you're only a light version. No. You're a chelik elakam mal mamish, Torah tzivilon Moshe merasha kilis Yankiv. You inherited the whole Torah like every other Jew. Moshe Rabbeinu and a small child inherit the same Torah. They're both Yarshim. They both have a chelik in Eretz Yisrael. We both, as I said, have chelik elakam mal mamish. So to say that somebody is a lighter version is ridiculous. The question now is, what are we going to do to live up to this potential? Okay. So I really broadened the subject far more than just the actual original question. And I think that's the way we have to look at it. We start getting out of our comfort zones and stop creating labels. I go to this synagogue where their standards are this way. The standards were established by the Rabbeim, starting from the Alter Rebbe. That does not change, and no one has the right and ability to change that. Our challenge is, are we going to live up, and how much are we going to live up? And don't call yourself a category, because don't ever underwrite yourself and underestimate your ability. Today you may not feel you're capable. So what are you going to do? Find out in 5 years from now that you basically dismiss the possibility for you to reach the greatest potential? God forbid. That's why these labels can end up being a very, not just derogatory, but actually destructive force, even though it could be said tongue-in-cheek and humorously and no means anything very serious. It's just a categorization, classification. Yeah, but every little thing has meaning, and the key is to remember that the greatest is expected from each one of us. Greatest according to our abilities and our opportunities and our skills and so on. Let's move on to another question. Healthy lifestyle. Okay, this is one I resisted personally because you have to be a little example for things that you're going to talk about. But as I just said a few minutes ago, it comes down to the standards that we have to expect of all of us, no matter whether you live up to it or not. So here's the question. What role does a healthy diet play in the life of a chassid? Why is it acceptable to serve junk food at social functions and farbrengens when we know a healthy lifestyle is vital to our Avodas Hashem? There's a pasuk. If living a healthy lifestyle is so vital and important in Avodas Hashem and Avodas Chassidus, why is it that so many Chassidim don't watch their diet? Every Jewish function of farbrengen, they serve all these unhealthy foods. It's repeat a little of what it said before. Where does exercise and eating healthy come into play in Chabad Chassidus? Do the Rabbeim say anything about this? I know it's important, but for my health, I know it's important for my health, but is it important for my neshama? Okay. Answer, my friends, is obviously This is not a question just of Chassidus, it's a question of Torah. As I said, Nishmartem Eidl Nafshei Seichem. The Rambam Paskins in Hilchos Deis, his Mishnah Torah, the Rebbe brings and actually corrects and says that there should be seemingly missing a word. That a yes guf body, that a healthy body is mid Avedis Hashem, he calls it. So the Rebbe says, Medarke Avedis Hashem, it's a part of serving God. And then he goes on, Hilchos Deis, to talk about different suggestions, medical suggestions and exercise and hygiene suggestions of how to maintain a healthy body. You go al pi halacha even further. We're not allowed to mutilate our own bodies, which also includes doing anything that's destructive to them, in any form. You could say, who cares? It's not hurting anyone else. So the famous Radbaz, where he says, because it's been nichsei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, your body is not yours. It's God's possession. It's God's property. Which also, Derech Agav, as a footnote, explains why cremation and other things of doing something with your own body, it's not yours. You were given to watch over. It's not yours. Return it. Someone gave you a gift. Would you go and return it to them in ashes? Someone gives you a gift, and you go and decide to burn it, and decide you're going to give it back to them. So health is about not just whether be a healthy person, she should be able to serve Hashem. That's another aspect. That if you're not healthy, which is one of the reasons that Rambam talks about Yehudim Gashmim, why the Torah talks about physical reward, including in Mashiach's times, because then when people have menuchas hanefesh, menuchas haguf, where they don't have obstacles due to health, due to disease, due to age, and so on, that allows them to sit and learn Torah peacefully. Whereas if their bodies are aching, or in some ways are unhealthy, can compromise a person's serving God. But in addition to that, the actual body itself is a God's possession. It's a godly property, divine property. As such, the mere fact that you keep it healthy, in addition to that, health allows you to do mitzvahs peacefully and more actively and for many more years. Because the healthier your body, the longer you live, you can do more mitzvahs with your life. There's a famous story with one of the Chassidim of the Tzemach Tzedek, who would sleep on the bench in order to break his body, so he should be able to derher, to be able to appreciate avot Chassidus. When it came to the end of his life, because of his doing that, he became not healthy, began to ail. So he said in the last days or the last breaths of his life, he said, if my sleeping on a bench for 20 years or whatever the number was, caused me to lose one day of putting on tefillin, it was not worth it. In other words, he was breaking his body in order to appreciate Chassidus. But if it causes him to lose one day and die prematurely, could have lived longer, and basically his health deteriorated as a result of this saskafia, of this deprivation, it was not worth it because it would have deprived him from doing a mitzvah one more day, tefillin, and other mitzvahs. They say when the Tzemach Tzedek heard that, some say it's not the Tzemach Tzedek, other Chassidim heard it, they said, darf ankommen zu einer, so schlafen auf einer Bank, 20 Jahre soll der Herren als ein Wort. That gufa, that itself, that he's able to say, that if one day I lost, it's not worth it, that itself, he came to that recognition through sleeping on a bench for 20 years. So, nevertheless, it's just a story I wanted to add to Chvivusa de Milsa. Nevertheless, it's absolutely part of Avedis Hashem and therefore part of Chassidus. We also know the Baal Shem Tov, one of the Yesodis was that the derech of sigufim and yisurim, which means to self-affliction in any form of self-flagellation or punishment to the body, which was accustomed by some, not by everybody. It was never mainstream. People who rolled in the snow, people who did physically things to themselves in order to break their body. Baal Shem Tov negated this approach, even for Yechidus Gula. Tanya talks about in the Geras HaTshuva that instead of fasting, we should redeem it through tzedakah, charity. The Rebbe brings it obviously many, many times. Interestingly, the Rebbe himself, Rab Levik, the Rebbe's father, writes to the Rebbe in the tzaddiks, you can see in the letters in Teres Levi Yitzchok, Kut Levi Yitzchok, where he talks the letters that the Rebbe's father writes to the Rebbe. He says to him that this derech that I hear that you're fasting is not the derech of Baal Shem Tov. As a footnote, clearly the Rebbe did fast and so on. Obviously the Rebbe would not defy what the Baal Shem Tov said. So however one explains it, I just wanted to throw it into the picture here. But the bottom line is, and the Rebbe was a healthy person. You could see that. Besides the longevity, you could see. However that worked, whether it was Beruchnis or Begashmis. But the point is, we're not Rabbeim, we're not talking about the Rebbe right now, we're talking about the regular person. The point is healthy diet, healthy hygiene, exercise, whatever it takes, whatever a doctor says, whatever a doctor says, which was given the permission, the authority to tell us what is healthy, is not just good for you personally, and good because then you can do more mitzvahs. It itself is Darkei Avodas Hashem. It itself is serving God. So there's no question that healthy lifestyle is part of Chassidus and part of Torah in every possible way. Why we find this junk food that you describe? Why do we find people who are overweight and obese? Why do we find people who are behaving in unhealthy ways? It has nothing to do with Chassidus. To suggest that a person is so immersed in divine Chassidus and learning that he forgets to eat, or he eats in unhealthy ways and he eats junk food because he can't tell the difference, lav dafke. If you find that type of individual who doesn't even know what he's eating, and he's eating junk food because he just simply doesn't know the difference between something healthy and unhealthy, we'll address that. But in most cases, eating these foods is because they're easy to eat, they're processed food, they taste good. They're absolutely the opposite of an avodah. It's not someone who's detached. So Geshem Ben Paharet, it says when he would eat breakfast, he was so immersed in his learning Chassidus, it says the kachkas, the chickens and the ducks or whatever were around, they would come and eat from his plate. He was so oblivious. He had to have people, his wife and others, chasing away these animals. So if you have a person like that, then we have to deal with that, how you ground a person like that. And that also may not be Tzarei Derech and Aved. But that at least is admirable. A person is so beyond it all. But we're talking about to be hefkedik with your food is simply, let's call a spade a spade. It has nothing to do with Chassidus. It has nothing to do with Torah. It has to do with being caught up in the same things that seduce everybody, the fast foods or whatever it is, that the instant gratification that these foods give, the highs of sugar, of carbs, etc., etc. I'm not here to go through a whole dietary discussion of how one should live a healthier lifestyle specifically. You have to go to your doctor, your nutritionist, and so on. But to make it very clear, it's not acceptable, it's not part of it. Why did Rabbeim, or they didn't make that an ikar? Because maybe it's obvious. They came to teach us things that are not the most obvious things. To start, the Rebbe should start speaking about people should eat healthy foods, is like things that the Rebbe didn't also say a person should be a mensch. Of course, he said it a number of times, but there's certain things that are part of Torah and parcel of the Torah. Individually, I'm sure the Rebbe did. They say the Rebbe heard from a doctor that smoking was unhealthy, and that caused the Rebbe to stop whatever amount he did smoke already. That's another discussion about that. But regarding the matter of health and hygiene, it's definitely derech Chassidus, and don't think just because Chassidus She'idin you see, people you respect, are disrespectful to their own bodies and are not behaving in the proper way, that it's legitimate. There's no tinge of that anywhere. You're not going to find it anywhere. You find it in many number of letters to Bochrim. The Rebbe writes they should sleep well, they should eat well, and be healthy. Because God forbid, some people maybe can get away with it, but sometimes if you don't take care of yourself, it can have other detrimental effects on mental health and on other health. So this is a matter that is not just prudent advice, it's also kedushadik advice. A body is a gufna, is a dover kaddish. It's a holy thing and should be held sanctified just as any other holy thing. And there are many other things that we don't do properly. It has nothing to do with Chassidus. It happens to be just because people get caught up, or whatever, the same laziness or the same lackadaisical attitude, and it shouldn't be legitimized. I think enough said about this. Next topic. So this is a topic that I'm going to address now. It's just the beginning, just the tip of the iceberg. I literally have, 30, 40, maybe more, 50 questions that we received on MyLife in the forum, which now is a good opportunity to mention that if you want to write your questions, go to meaningfullife.com/MyLifeLive. There's an anonymous forum. You can write all your questions there, your comments, your challenges, your rebuttals, whatever you'd like. If you have actually sources to some of the things that I've shared here, it's always appreciated. I could read it in later episodes, something, a letter or an anecdote or a story or something that you may have happened with you personally. I would be honored to be able to share that with others. It doesn't have to be with a name. Something that would be a good way to appreciate and confirm or or frankly, if it's something that contradicts what I've said, I will stand corrected if I see it somewhere where we have a legitimate source. So please share all of that as well. So this topic is one that's come up a number of times. I've been pushing it off simply because I was doing research, and I didn't want to address it without the proper and comprehensive review, because I don't want to say something here that's speculative. I want to talk with solid grounding and underpinnings based on the Rabbeim, based on the Rebbe, and so on. And that's the issue of secular education. Yes, I know it's going to open up a Pandora's box, and it's almost a no-win situation, because some people go one extreme, others the other extreme. So let's open up this topic, try to address it as best as possible. As I said, this will just be the beginning. See it as part one of an ongoing discussion. Over the months, we've literally had dozens and dozens and dozens of questions about this role. And here's a few questions, a sampling of them. And you'll see from this how the scope is a very wide one. So in no particular order, I'm just going through a few key questions. And as I said, there'll be many, many more. And I'll address them. I don't even think it'll be 2 episodes. It'll probably be more than that. And so be it. We'll address it as exhaustively as we can. And hopefully, if anybody has insight or any thoughts or sources from the Rebbe that I am not mentioning or that in some way can help illuminate, enlighten, l'teyelas harabim, benefit of the public, please share it. So the question, should we supplement our child's learning with limudei chayil? Limudei chayil means secular education. Is there a right way to pursue a secular education? And just to read a few more questions, if we can't all go out on shlichus, we need other options for livelihood. What is our stance on secular education in order to learn a trade and make a living? Another way someone phrased it, what is the Rebbe's Tanya approach regarding learning limudei chayil? Again, learning secular subjects. While I understand that we need to have faith that Hashem provides all, that we need all that we need, and therefore we only need to make a keli, a container for his blessings, how can a parent not provide his child with the basics in general education? Mathematics, accounting, certain basic best practices in business, and so on. Not all Lubavitchers will be able to go on shlichus, so why not give the basics to be able to further the education of a person once he finishes the yeshiva system? I do believe this is a cause for resentment by many young adults. Please clarify what is written in Tanya Perek 8 and the Rebbe's view on the matter. You know, in Tanya Perek 8, he talks about Chachmas Chitzenius. Chachmas Chitzenius means outer wisdom. It's an expression for wisdom about matters of the world. Outer as opposed to Chacham Pnimius, which would be the Torah wisdom. Wisdom about life and wisdom about the world, worldly matters. This can include science, this can include the physical sciences, social sciences, political sciences. I've been teaching, but then he concludes that there are those, the Rambam and the Ramban, which we shall address more at length, who knew how to make Elasis Kardim, who knew how to use the secular studies for Kedusha, Shem Shemayim, etc. So clearly you see that there is that possibility. And the Alter Rebbe cites it. Is it something that we can apply to ourselves, or we only take the negating any exposure to this type of wisdom? Because it's metame Chabad shebenefesh. It defiles, taxifies the mind of a soul, the mind of a holy and sacred divine soul. So these are all, as I said, posing questions. Another question. I've been teaching for a few years now, and I'm not sure if I should continue. On the one hand, I enjoy teaching to a degree. I have success in my work, and I can't really imagine doing otherwise. On the other hand, sometimes I don't feel very well equipped and trained. I never went to school for it, although I attended a seminar here and there. It just doesn't quite do it. The seminar, that is. I feel like taking official courses and college classes is not what the Rebbe wants, but I'm sure he also doesn't want not experienced teachers that are playing around with an important thing called a child's life. I'm thinking to stop teaching, but realize that there must be others out there who understand the outlook I should have. I don't think reading Shari Chinuch is enough for me. Shari Chinuch, I assume he means here the Kloli Chinuch, the education of the Rebbe, Friedrich Rebbe, that's printed in a number of places. Any ideas, advice, insight? Okay. And one more question for this episode. As I said, there are many, many more. My 7-year-old grandson reads both Yiddish and Hebrew. and answers his Parsha questions in Yiddish and learns only Kodesh in Yeshiva, Limudei Kodesh. I have no problem with that. My husband's a full-time learner and then some. My daughter says that the Rebbe doesn't want boys to learn to read and write English outside of, separate from school, and some add until 9 years old. My concern is that she is just fine with downloading him endless video games, some quite violent, from the internet. Any spare moment he has in the house, he spends on the computer with games. I can't imagine that the Rebbe would find all this acceptable in this day and age as a substitute for reading appropriate materials on one's interests in nature, science. All Gadlus Habeda and Yiddish storybooks. It seems to me keeping a child illiterate creates a terrible vacuum and encourages immersion in a pastime that is mindless at best and terribly dangerous at worst. I would like to know if this hashkafa of no English reading is accurate or a distortion of the idea that one's mind should be reserved for Torah, which would take a lot of doing if Torah isn't sought outside of school hours. I can only imagine that if one were to seek an answer through the Igris as to whether ongoing computer games are better for a child than learning to read, that the Rebbe would agree. I cannot imagine. I am anxious to have clarification of these points. Thank you for taking the time to respond. I feel this is a case of pekuach nefesh. So this is a selection, and as I said, there's far more than where this came from. But let's begin the discussion, and I welcome you all to enter into the fray. I'm sure what I say is going to please some and not please others, but frankly, that's not really the objective of MyLife. Is about pleasing or not pleasing. I try to convey what the Rabbeim said, what Chassidus says about these matters, and because that's where we get our direction from. And this is nothing to do with our personal sentiments and feelings. If, for example, you know 100% clear the Rebbe says this is what you should do, that's what you should do. If he says absolutely clear this is what you shouldn't do, it's what you shouldn't do. It makes no difference if we understand it or not. Kemuvan u'poshet, that the Rebbe explained himself and did not want to just issue edicts and decrees and gzeiros, because it's far more effective when you understand and appreciate both with your mind and heart. But at the end of the day, we do have an authority. And again, I'm not here to impose on anyone this authority, but since I feel the responsibility, we talk MyLife, Chassidus Applied, I'm not here to talk about Simon Jacobson's ideas. I'm not here to talk about anybody else's ideas. We're here to talk about the Rabbeim's ideas and their standards. And as I've mentioned many times, to me, is no doubt in my mind that Rabbeim understood who we are, and they weren't just talking on a lofty level to the highest souls. They understood very much the challenges of our time, and still they said what they said. And if we don't understand how it applies, because we have a question, imreiku, if you're empty or you're missing an answer, bikem, it's from you. It means we have to look deeper into ourselves. So we're all in the same boat. I'm with you in many of these questions. I've had many of them myself. Clearly I'm speaking English here. I write. I didn't go to higher education for this, but nevertheless, I definitely, you train yourself, you learn, and so on. And it's a big issue, this whole secular education topic. So let me begin from the beginning, instead of starting from middle, and try to address it in orderly progression. What exactly did the Rebbe say? What did he not say? What did he mean what he said? Are there exceptions? Is there a black and white answer to this? And much more than what I've just said here. So when you go into the Rebbeim in general, obviously we have to turn to the Rebbe because our times is different than the Alter Rebbe's times. I don't think there were many Chassidim with the Alter Rebbe that had a question whether they should go to college. First of all, they weren't even allowed into whatever universities existed due to anti-Semitism and so on. Secondly, they weren't challenged with that temptation even. They didn't live in that type of world. So much of the discussion is obviously relevant mostly in our generation. So we have to turn to the Friedrich Rebbe, but above all the Rebbe, because the Rebbe addressed it more than anyone else. And of course, we have to throw into the pot that the Rebbe himself went to college. However you interpret it. Whether he went to be Mavarer, whether he went just to be Yitzhak, whatever it is. But some type of secular education, some type of classes the Rebbe definitely attended. Now, you could say there's nothing to do with us, it's not of our business, and I'm not suggesting that is a hira, because we know the Rebbe also spoke very negatively and very against young men and women going to college, which of course begs the question, if it's so abgefrekt, why did the Rebbe himself do it? Now, this is not a question. I don't pose questions on the Rebbe. The Rebbe, I'm here to be Mekayim Divrei Rav. I'm here to support. I'm not here to question the Rebbe. But I'm asking it because people have written such questions, and it's important to address, and we're not shying away. Obviously, with all the respect, because the Rebbe is a Rebbe, but it may help us with having some insights in the whole picture. So when you look in the early Sikhs in the early 50s, when the Rebbe began speaking in the Sikhs of Tovshin Tezvov and Tezayin, Pesach, and other big Fabrengens, Yud Tammuz, and I'll address a list of many of these Sikhs as we go, sources, and anything that you obviously can point out, I'd appreciate. You see, the key thing when you read them, besides all the details, is the Rebbe is going into a basic war almost against a klippa of our time. A klippa. Every generation has its klippas. One of the klippas, the Rebbe says, is tachlis. What is tachlis? Tachlis means, how are you going to make a living? And it became ingrained in American society, which itself was a big challenge, because America, as we know, the almighty dollar. Jews knew in the early 20th century, when they came here, that when they sent their children from the pogroms in Eastern Europe, that the Gashmis will be maybe secure in America, but Ruchnius forget about. It was like it accepted that America, you're going to work. It's a capitalist system, and work consumes all its inhabitants, and it was a given that Jews will lose, God forbid, their faith and their, you can't say their amunah, but their dedication, their level of dedication, etc., etc. I mean, there are people who actually threw the tefillin overboard on their way coming into Ellis Island. I don't want to speak Begnusen Shal Yisrael, but that was reality. America. Why did the Frierdiker Rebbe have to say America is nicht anders? Because everyone thought America is anders, is different. This was the place where you make a living. But it didn't just become a living, it became an Avodah Zarah. This is the heart and essence of who you are as a human being. What defines success? That you make enough money, make a lot of money, status, and so on. Now, if you know in history, this wasn't always the case. America was different than other countries before. The Europeans, even till this day, like to remind Americans that in Europe, they work to live, and Americans live to work. Now, America has many virtues, and we'll discuss that as well. But this is a klippa that was existent, especially after World War II, especially after industrialization. The idea of that you want to be somebody, you want to be able to survive, not just survive, thrive. You have to go to higher education, college. That is a necessity for you to be a shleimus ha'adam, a complete person. Now that is what the Rebbe went to war against. It wasn't just secular education per se, because Chachams Chitzenis is metames hanefesh. That's a part of it, and we shall address it as well. But the bigger part of it was the problem in the idea that this is the only way to be a complete person. Which from the Rebbe's point of view, if you think from a Torah point of view, goes a hepech leibishter. Why did God send us down to this earth? To make money and thrive and be a successful business person? No. To make a dira b'tachtenim, to change the world. So to suddenly make the tachlis of your life is to be a successful at work, and the only way to do that is to go to higher education or secular education and so on, it goes against the grain, the essence of why we're sent to this earth. So if you look at the Sikhs in those years, you'll see the Rebbe Sikh is printed in Chelik Aleph and other places where the Rebbe talks about throwing the boys into, Pari says, throw the boys into the River Nile. And he says, what is that? Throwing the children into secular education that turns into Avodah Zarah, the River Nile, the only way we sustain ourselves. So suddenly, there's a whole new way to become a human being and to be successful. It has nothing to do with God. It has nothing to do with your purpose. It has to do with you getting the training to become a professional. And that becomes the thing you need to do more than anything else. Because once you have the money, you can then do everything else. This was the Rebbe's, the war that he had with this. And you don't often hear the emphasis on that. You hear the emphasis on secular education can destroy your life and so on. Why am I saying it? Because unless you understand the real problem, we can go overboard in misunderstanding. But the Rebbe didn't want people to know how to write their name in English. The Rebbe didn't want people to know how to add, Basa Matan Ba'amunah. Even Shluchim, they have to know how to keep accounting, books. A Gvir gives you money. How did you spend the money? There's accounting principles. There's best practices, etc., etc. Obviously, you can hire people and you don't have to become a lawyer and accountant to do it all, but you have to have some respect for it. And above all, goes without saying that every highly educated human being, no way he's come out against education. There are lahavdil, no lahavdil, rabbis or others who push primitive human beings. They're not difficult human beings. They're not devolved. They're not developed. And they live in a very narrow, ghetto-ish type of mentality. So for them, anything except their little world is already dangerous. The Rebbe is the opposite type of person. A person who is a global visionary, sees the world in expansive ways, understands that there's lessons in everything, including science, in Vedas Hashem, and demonstrated that so many times. So it wasn't like some type of primitive or provincial view on education and knowledge. How can the Rebbe, a person, just Begashmish, B'derech HaTeva, could not be a person who came out against knowledge and accumulation of knowledge? In addition to the fact that we know that the Rebbe gave many directives to people who were in universities already to finish their education there. So if it was a purely, absolutely unacceptable thing, like Avodah Zarah Mamish, since when? Just because you started building an Avodah Zarah, that's why you have to finish it. God forbid. As soon as something prohibited, you find out it's prohibited, stop immediately. Dr. Block from Canada, London, Ontario, tells the story about his own life, where he was a philosophy major. Later went on to become a professor. But then once he was exposed to Chassidus and Torah, that's what he wanted to be. He wanted to stay in 770. He says the Rebbe told him, Loi mitan aleph. I never clarified whether the Rebbe said Loi mitan aleph or that was his understanding that it was an emphatic Loi. Loi means no. Absolutely no. The Rebbe told him, you go back and become an Aristotelian professor and you bring Yiddishkeit into it and reach Yiddish students and so on. So that also has to be understood, and we will address that as well. So there's no way that Rebbe, of course, he appreciated knowledge and secular education and so on. Then you have the Rambam and the Ramban and hundreds of others in the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda and others who were masters. You talk about the debates they had with the scholars and scientists of their time. So to suggest that that type of knowledge is completely off limits is not what the Rebbe was talking about. He was talking, number one, first and foremost, the klippah of worshiping it as an end in itself. There's still much to be said, because I still have to talk about bochrim and young men and women, etc. People who never went to it, and what should be there. But the Rebbe's main objective was not choosing some type of thing, it was about a challenge. Because if all Jews would be swept up in this momentum or movement of America, that you must go to college, you must get higher education, you must have secular education, the only way you can succeed, it would destroy, it would compromise the whole purpose of who we are. On the B'tochen Hashem, Amunah B'Hashem. And again, that does not preclude knowledge and does not preclude education, as we shall address. Another point that has to be added into this equation. Everyone knows the Zohar, that the Rebbe quotes time and again, the Zohar, the famous Zohar in Parsha Nayach, where he talks about, on the Psukim in Parsha Nayach, where he talks about Beshit, there he talks about the 600th year, that the 6,000th, in the 6th millennium, in the 600th year, which is the year Tov Reish, Hey Alofim, Tov Reish, there will be an explosion. It uses the words from the Mabel of Mayim Elyenim and Mayim Tachtenim. There will be an explosion of Chochmah L'mayla, which it refers to as the Mefarshim say, and the Rebbe brings the Mefarshim in Eirachama and so on, and Zayar, refers to so divine wisdom, Pnimis HaTeirah, Chassidus, and so on. And there'll be an explosion of the waters below, Chochmah L'mato, which refers to, as the Rebbe brings, the Industrial Revolution, which began which was you can say its core element was in the year Tov Reish, 1840, L'Mizparam, and the explosion of technology, the scientific revolution, the information age. And we know the Sikhs, how often the Rebbe spoke about the use of technology, seeing it as a koyach adir, mishpotim tov shemem dal. The Rebbe wrote a whole opening to understand technology as a power of God. We didn't create atoms, we didn't create nuclear energy. We created tools and instruments that can tap into cellular energy, that can tap into subatomic particles. But who created those powers? Who created the airwaves? Who created light waves? These are divine creations. The Rebbe uses the word koyach adir b'teva. an enormous age, enormously power in nature. It was there when Adam Arishon was there. Whether he or Chava knew or didn't know is irrelevant. But it was there from the beginning, just like electricity was there. They didn't know how to tap into it. So these forces were all, so the Zohar is saying this as a prelude to Mashiach's coming. Now, secular wisdom and knowledge is complete posel legamri, totally treif. How could the Zohar make such a statement and equate it with Pnimis HaTeira, and the Rebbe brings it, etc.? So clearly, to just make this blanket statement that the Rebbe, Chassidus, is against knowledge, information, education is absolutely wrong. Worshipping it, seeing it as the tachlis, that was the main war the Rebbe fought against, because that was the klippah of the times and still remains so in many instances. I once spoke for a group who asked me this question. It's a group of educated academic individuals who were almost cynical and dismissive, and they're saying, how could I hear that the Lubavitch, Chabad, the Rebbe dismisses higher education? It's the basis of all our knowledge and information, professionalism, and so on. So often you hear with the problem with the college campuses from the Rebbe, it says it's printed, Chelik Tezvov, Noyach, and other places, is the environment. The environment of a very anti-God environment. For whatever reason, that academics are more mushchosim and more corrupt than others, arrogance, etc., etc. We'll go into all the details right now. But clearly an environment, so for an impressionable student, man or woman, young man or woman, it's an environment that can actually have a detrimental effect on them, as we've seen. That's what you usually hear. But I must admit that is true on one end, but there's far more than that. And this brings me back to the tachlis. I once heard, and this I shared with the academics, and they really were extremely impressed. They never thought of it this way. I said, someone goes to higher education, so they have usually a coach, they have a life, someone who's a supervisor or advisor that helps you determine what courses to take, what to major in, what to minor in, and so on. And a lot of it's to do with careers. What the future careers, what careers are going to be hot, in demand. There's a lot of it. So just hypothetically, here's the scenario. You have in a city 1,000 doctors, 1,000 lawyers, 1,000 accountants, but you have only one engineer. So obviously, the city needs more engineers. Or we can exchange any of those words. 1,000 engineers, 1,000 lawyers, 1,000 accountants, but one doctor. Clearly, you need more than one doctor. So a good advisor will help advise and say, the market is going, there's a glut of these type of professionals. Why don't you consider this type of work to major in? Okay, let's just say it works out that way. So at least you're going into a field, there's a lot of demand. Computer science, information architecture. These are the hot things today. Programmers, content creators. Now, think of it this way. Just as human beings need accountants and lawyers and doctors and all the other professions I mentioned, every person also needs a soul doctor. It's also a doctor. As the Rambam says, there's cheli ha-nefesh and there's cheli ha-guf. We have therapists, we have psychologists, we have psychiatrists, we have social workers, we have all different types of therapists. These are people who are meant to help person work with their emotional stuff. What did the Torah come to do? The Torah, they didn't just teach Torah as technical knowledge. These were soul doctors. Moshe was the ultimate soul doctor. A mumche an neshama. So if you have 1,000 lawyers and 1,000 doctors and 1,000 engineers and 1,000 accountants and 1,000 of all the other professions, and you only have one soul doctor, or not even one, what should be a person's choice? So in the old times, you can say a healthier world. In a healthier world where there was a balance, where people did not worship work and careers and professional secular education, but they saw it as a balance. My life is my family. My life are my beliefs, my ideology. My life is to perpetuate the legacy and heritage I was passed on. But since you have to live in this world, you need to make a parnasa, a livelihood. So I'll go out to chop some wood, to carry some water, to work in the field, or the other labor that existed. No one ever worshipped and made that into the most important thing in my life is to carry wood. Today you can convince yourself because the work maybe is not as menial and not as draining. That's a sophisticated job. I sit behind the desk. But it's the same issue. It's a means, not an end. So in a world where there was more focus on the end, you can say that there were Talmidei Chacham who actually absolutely did study trades, did study science and so on, because there was balance. They were studying knowledge for the sake of understanding. It's not an end in itself. It's not what you worship. It's part of appreciating the Torah, appreciating God, Morabu Masecha, Magadlu Masecha, or to make a living. But there was a focus. In a world where there's such a drought and such a hunger and need and demand for soul direction, soul as an S-O-U-L, and you have doctors and you have lawyers and accountants, what should a person be going into? The thing that's needed most. The doctors and lawyers, they also need it. How to live a healthy spiritual life. How to live a good Jewish life. What does Judaism mean for me, for my children? How do I continue this, perpetuate the tradition and legacy, the rich of Jewish life? And this is not just about Jews, also non-Jews. Helping non-Jews find direction and purpose in their lives. So when the Rebbe was setting out in his beginning of his Aveda Hishlichus, what did he do? He addressed exactly that. He addressed the mission of our lives. And to suddenly replace it, that now the mission is, tachlis, find yourself a profession, go to higher education, spend most of your lives, impressionable years, for that. For what? To end up with good means, a good tool chest. But what are you going to use the tool chest for? What's the purpose of your life? That the Rebbe saw as being a major distortion that can completely destroy people's souls. And that's what he went to war against. So those strong sikhs about Limudei Chayil was exactly that. If you read them, he wasn't knocking the knowledge and information, which we shall address in a future episode. What does that mean? That's metames, ameach. Obviously that needs to be spoken about. But the big problem was the worship of it, to make that the center of existence. I'll conclude with a story that I heard. I was once speaking somewhere in New York about the need for having a mission statement in life, that there's no business that can function without a mission statement, so neither can we as individuals. And I spoke about the importance of a mission. When you have a mission, everything else, that's the hub that connects all the spokes of your life, all the details. If you don't have one, you just have this fragmented life of billions of details that have nothing that connects them. So finding your mission, your tachlis, your purpose, why did God send you to this earth is the most important thing, which is why our formative years, our educational years are meant to teach us that. And then you go and find the tools you need to fulfill that mission. In general, the mission of the Neshama, the souls descend below, to transform this material world and make it a home for God. After I finished my talk, a guy came over to me, no names, he's no longer with us. Now, he's Lamaila already. His neshama went back to God a little while after this story. And he said to me, I'd like to share a personal story with you, and you can use it in future talks. And I think here's a perfect forum to bring it. He says, I was a bocher in Yeshiva in 770. And I went into the Rebbe in Yechidus, and I asked the Rebbe, I said to the Rebbe, I'd like a bracha, a blessing, to go to college, to higher education. And the Rebbe said to me, do you want a bracha or also an eitzah? So he said, I want a bracha, but I want to give an eitzah. Of course, I'll listen to the Rebbe's advice. And the Rebbe smiled and said, a bracha mit ha'eitzah is almost starker. A blessing with advice is always stronger than a blessing without advice. Anyway, this young bacher, was I think late teens, maybe he was in the early 20s, late, or almost 20, that age, sounds like that was his age. The Rebbe says to my advice is you shouldn't go. So he said, I had a little chutzpah, he tells me, and I said to the Rebbe, can I ask the Rebbe why? And can I ask also the Rebbe with respect? The Rebbe himself went. So the Rebbe said, no, Hagufa, since I went, I can have experience. I'm not talking theoretically, I was there. So I can tell you that it's not a place that you should go to. And he asked the question, why? So the Rebbe said to him do you like mathematics? Yeah, mathematics. Mathematics is a prerequisite in many schools. Even if you don't become a mathematician, it's part of logical thinking, organized thinking, and in general useful in many areas of life. The Rebbe said, can you draw for me a circle? And the Rebbe took out a piece of paper with a pencil and said, draw for me a circle, a perfect circle. He drew a circle. The Rebbe said, is this a perfect circle? The fellow said, no, it's not. Can you draw for me a perfect circle? He said, I can't. You can't draw a perfect circle on your own. What will help you make a perfect circle? So he said to the Rebbe, a compass. Now, a compass is a needle you stick into the paper, it keeps it firm, and around that you create a circumference that's equally distant from the center of the circle. So the diameter is equal, or the radius is equal to the entire, everywhere which makes a circle is a perfect circle. The Rebbe had a compass, he gave him the compass, and he created a perfect circle. So the Rebbe said, what was the difference? He said, simple, the compass has a strong center, so you have yourself a focal point around which you can create a perfect circle, which a circle is defined that every part of the circle is equally distant from the center point. For example, a square is not that way. It's actually, derech agav, not negated to this story. In Kabbalah, in Eitz Chaim, right in the beginning, in Eitz Chaim, it talks about this. Why the tzimtzum was b'derech eagle, not like a square, a ribua, or a rectangle, or other ways. Because then it wouldn't be equally distant, as he explains the reasoning there. Ayin Beis, he explains the Eitz Chaim itself. Going back to the story, the Rebbe said that that's exactly the point. Knowledge, all forms of knowledge, and everything you're going to acquire in school, those are circles. They're not the focal point. The first thing you need in life is to have your mission, your focal point. Then the knowledge you gather comes to express, to manifest. How am I going to fulfill that focal point? That's the how, but the what is the focal point. If you don't have your focal point, you're going to end up having incomplete circles, imperfect circles, jagged circles, and you'll start a new circle, another circle, another circle. You're not ready yet because you don't have your focal point. Get your focal point in place. Then we can discuss it. Which of course was an implication, this is already the end of the Yechidus. The guy said to me, the Rebbe didn't say this, he said that implied that the Rebbe did have his focal point. So he was able to know, to put things in context and not be overwhelmed and understand vu ein und vu eis, as we say, about the secular knowledge he acquired. Well, anyway, this fellow said to me, I did not listen. I did not listen to the Rebbe, to the advice, sadly. And I went on, I became a professor of philosophy and mathematics and other sciences. But you know something? I never created a perfect circle. I created broken circles, exactly as the Rebbe said, jagged circles, incomplete circles, another circle here, another circle. I never created my circle. He said it with almost a tear in his eye. A few months later, I believe, if I recall correctly, he passed away. He told me this story. It's a Medidika story because you take the whole thing in a different way, understanding life. It's much more complicated whether in this type of a Rebbe, you could study this, you can't study that. Obviously, we still need to address many other questions, what age and in what way, and should our yeshivas in any way bring in any tutors, private tutoring. I mean, there's so many things to talk about. As I said, this is only the beginning. So we addressed a number of topics. I did not have the time, I see, to do follow-up on the Rebbe edition of the previous 2 weeks, speaking about the Rebbe and Gimmel Tammuz. But I do pledge in Berlin Neder to do that as well as we go forward. I want to thank you again for listening. Thank you for your tremendous feedback. It's been very encouraging. The questions keep coming. People ask me, do we have enough material? I can tell you from based on the questions that I have, I think this can go on quite a while and not be redundant. Thank God. Thank God there's a deep need out there. Thank God there's a deep hunger, which is, as we know, Shailas Chacham Chesed Tshuva. The question of a wise person is half an answer. If you're hungry for a question, if you're hungry for an answer, even if you don't have the answer yet, the mere fact that you want it and you're desperate and you are passionate about getting it, you'll find your answer. So I want to commend all of you and all of us. The mere fact that we are aware of an issue, our own issues, our children's issues, our friends' issues, that alone is a very powerful force in healing. And I can tell you and testify to this, and with all due humility, that I've seen people who have heard some of these shows and discussed them, that the mere fact talking about it brings things to the surface, causes you to look deeper. And I feel honored and privileged to be part of the process and do my little part to be able to help be a catalyst. At the end of the day, we have all the keiches we need inside of us. The Rebbe and the Rabbeim gave us these keiches. Unfortunately, we get distracted, we get seduced, we get sidetracked by things that should only be the means and not the end. So until next Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m., this has been My Life, Chassidus Applied, episode 24 with Simon Jacobson. Thank you very much, and everyone should have a very meaningful and Chassidish week.